Peanut Butter was a golden retriever with a heart as big as his paws, and an appetite even bigger. From the moment he was a puppy, he had a way of bringing joy to everyone around him, mostly by clumsily running into things and making himself the center of attention. His boundless energy, constant wagging tail, and that goofy, tongue-lolling grin made him impossible to ignore. He belonged to the Thompson family, who lived in a small house at the edge of town, right next to a vast open field. For Peanut Butter, that field was paradise. Every morning, without fail, Mr. Thompson would let him out, and he'd bolt across the grass, chasing birds, leaping over dandelions, rolling in the dirt, and occasionally barking at his own shadow. But Peanut Butter wasn't just a pet, he was part of the family, and, as the Thompsons would say, the best source of entertainment since Dad tried to fix the washing machine by himself. When they first brought him home, he was a tiny, fluffy ball of fur that could fit in the palm of their hands, and yet he managed to trip over his own ears. They had gotten him during a difficult time. Mrs. Thompson had recently been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and their home had felt heavy and quiet. Peanut Butter changed that. From the moment he walked in, he brought light, laughter, and a sense of hope they desperately needed, not to mention a mess wherever he went. As Mrs. Thompson's condition worsened, she had to spend more time resting, but Peanut Butter was always by her side. He would curl up at her feet, his head resting on her lap, as if he could sense when she was having a bad day. He also had a habit of bringing her random gifts he found around the house, a sock, a squeaky toy, once even a half-eaten sandwich from who knows where, and dropping them on her lap with the proudest look on his face. He had this way of making her smile, even on the hardest days. Sometimes, she would sit in the garden with him, throwing a tennis ball as far as she could, and watching him sprint after it, ears flapping like he was about to take flight. It was a small comfort, a reminder that there was still joy to be found, even in the midst of pain. One summer evening, when the air was warm and the sky was streaked with shades of pink and orange, Mr. Thompson let Peanut Butter out for his usual run in the field. Peanut Butter bolted out the door like a furry rocket, ready to conquer the world, or at least chase a squirrel. But this time, Peanut Butter didn't come back. At first, Mr. Thompson thought nothing of it. Maybe Peanut Butter had found a new scent to follow or was busy playing in the tall grass or digging up the fifth hole that week. But as the minutes turned into an hour, and the sky grew darker, Mr. Thompson's heart began to race. He called out Peanut Butter's name, whistled, and even shook the bag of treats that always brought him running, but there was no sign of him. Panic set in. The Thompsons grabbed flashlights, called their neighbors, and began searching the field, the nearby streets, and even the woods that bordered their neighborhood. Peanut Butter, they called, over and over, their voices echoing into the night. They searched until their legs were tired, and their throats were hoarse, but Peanut Butter was nowhere to be found. Mrs. Thompson's eyes welled up with tears as she clung to her husband's arm, the fear of losing not just a pet, but a source of comfort and joy, almost too much to bear. Days turned into weeks, and there was still no sign of Peanut Butter. The Thompsons put up flyers, posted on social media, and even offered a reward, though they made sure to clarify that he might try to pay you back in chewed-up slippers, but nothing worked. Mrs. Thompson would sit by the window every afternoon, hoping to see Peanut Butter trotting up the driveway, but all she saw was the empty field, swaying gently in the breeze. It was like a piece of their family had been torn away, leaving behind a quiet, painful void. One afternoon, about a month after Peanut Butter had disappeared, Mrs. Thompson was sitting on the porch, sipping a cup of tea and contemplating how much more boring life was without the dog trying to steal her socks. She had just about given up hope when she saw a figure walking across the field. At first, she thought it was just one of the neighborhood kids, but as they got closer, she realized it was an elderly man, with a cane in one hand and a leash in the other. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw who was at the end of that leash. It was Peanut Butter, looking like he had just come back from an epic adventure, slightly dirtier but wagging his tail as if nothing had happened. Mrs. Thompson rushed down the steps, her tea spilling onto the grass, and called out Peanut Butter's name. As soon as he heard her voice, Peanut Butter's ears perked up, and he tore across the field, running as fast as his legs could carry him. He nearly bowled her over when he leapt into her arms, his tail wagging so hard it looked like it might fall off. Mrs. Thompson buried her face in his fur, tears streaming down her cheeks, whispering, "You're home, you're finally home," while Peanut Butter, in true fashion, licked her face and then promptly tried to steal the treat out of her pocket. The elderly man smiled and approached slowly, introducing himself as George. He explained that he had found Peanut Butter a few towns over, wandering near a busy road, sniffing a fast food wrapper like he was on a mission. Peanut Butter had been dirty, tired, and limping slightly, but when George called out to him, he had come running, just like he was now. George didn't know who Peanut Butter belonged to, but he could see how special he was, so he took him in, gave him food, water, and a place to sleep, though Peanut Butter had tried to eat the remote control. It wasn't until he saw one of the flyers on a visit to the town market that he realized Peanut Butter had a family looking for him. Mrs. Thompson couldn't stop thanking George, her gratitude pouring out between sobs of relief. She explained how much Peanut Butter meant to them, how he had been there through the hardest times, and how they had feared they might never see him again. George nodded, his eyes soft with understanding. "I could tell he was loved," he said, patting Peanut Butter's head. "He's a good dog. He never gave up trying to find his way back." Peanut Butter, however, was too busy trying to chase a butterfly to notice the heartfelt moment. Peanut Butter was home, but he wasn't quite the same. He had lost a bit of weight, and there was a small scar on his paw, but his spirit was still there, as strong and goofy as ever. He followed Mrs. Thompson everywhere, as if afraid to let her out of his sight, and it was almost like he was trying to make up for lost time by being extra lovable. It took a few weeks, but slowly, Peanut Butter began to return to his old self. He would chase after tennis balls, roll in the grass, and wag his tail so hard it would make the whole room shake. He even brought back his habit of trying to sit on Mr. Thompson's lap, despite not realizing that he had grown way too big for that. But there was something different now, a deeper bond, an unspoken understanding between Peanut Butter and the Thompsons. They had almost lost him, and in finding him again, they realized just how much he meant to them. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, watching Peanut Butter play in the field, Mrs. Thompson turned to her husband and said, "I think Peanut Butter saved me, you know. Even when I was at my lowest, he made me smile. And when we lost him, it was like losing a piece of myself. But now that he's back, I feel whole again." Mr. Thompson squeezed her hand, and they watched as Peanut Butter bounded through the tall grass, stopping occasionally to bark at a dandelion or roll in a particularly nice patch of dirt. Life moved on, as it always does, but from that day forward, the Thompsons never took a single moment with Peanut Butter for granted. Every walk, every game of fetch, every time he curled up beside them, they felt a sense of gratitude that was hard to put into words. Peanut Butter had been through so much, but he had made it home, and he had brought a piece of that light, that hope, and his hilarious antics back with him. And in the quiet moments, when the house was still, and Mrs. Thompson was resting, Peanut Butter would lie at her feet, just like he always had, as if to say, "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Now, about those treats you owe me." For the Thompsons, Peanut Butter wasn't just a dog. He was a reminder of resilience, of the simple joys that keep us going, and of the love that can be found in even the darkest of times. And every time Mrs. Thompson looked at him, she was reminded that no matter how far you might stray, there's always a way back home, as long as there's someone waiting for you with open arms, and maybe a tennis ball or two.